Okay, great. So it's 9 o'clock on the dot. Thank you everyone for signing up for today's free webinar. As you know, this is another presentation of the Group ASI free webinar series. This series featuring O3 Solution, this session featuring O3 Solution is presented in collaboration with the AWP conference, which is October 2nd and 3rd, 2018, down in Houston at the JW Marriott Houston Galleria. It's going to be another 2-day event full of AWP information and featuring construction project owners, global EPCs, technology providers, consultants, implementation support experts, everything you've come to expect from the conference. And O3 Solution, we are happy to announce, is joining us once again as a conference level sponsor. So you'll be able to see them on the main stage and in a 1-hour breakout session. AWPconference.com is just in the process of being launched with a bunch of information. The calendar is currently in development. We work every year with an owner EPC advisory committee that helps us develop the program to make sure that we're targeting information and content that is relevant to the most current priorities and challenges in AWP in industry. And we work with our sponsors like O3 Solution to make sure that we're hitting the right notes every year for our audience. I see a lot of familiar names as well as a lot of new names in the registration for today's webinar. So we hope you do enjoy it. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to Josh Gervin, CEO of O3 Solution, for today's session. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Today, we're going to be talking about driving AWP success through oversight and accountability. And I'd like to get started first with a safety moment. Today's safety moment, we're going to be talking about bicycle safety, and this is 8 rules for drivers to coexist with bicyclists. And first, last year in the US alone, there were over 1,000 bicyclist fatalities and about 500,000 bicycle-related injuries. So it is a significant source of safety issues and something that we think is worth some time and thought. First, appreciating a bicyclist's vulnerability. A car weighs 2 tons, while the average bike is 20 pounds. So just understanding the difference in vulnerability between you and a car and the bicycle. Knowing the bicyclist's rights. In the US, bicycles are supposed to be on the roadway and are considered vehicles. They're not supposed to be on the sidewalk. That's not true in all countries. So know the rules of the particular country that you're in and where you should expect to see bicyclists. Looking around you, but not at your phone. So it's always important not to be looking at your phone while driving. But it's also important to I think some of us, and myself included, have been guilty of getting stuck at a red light waiting for a left turn and checking our phone, and then maybe the light turns green for the turn signal and you start going without doing a real meaningful peripheral scan for pedestrians and bicyclists. And because they're smaller and don't catch the eye as much as a car, that can lead to real dangerous situations. So being aware and looking around, considering the benefits of bicycling, so it does reduce congestion and pollution. Being aware of turns, so bicyclists can go 15 or 20 miles an hour and even faster when going downhill. So when you're thinking about overtaking a bicycle, don't do it if you have a turn coming up that you have to make. If that bicycle may be planning to continue going at a rapid speed, you can underestimate how much space you need to have in order to get past them. Make sure you give cyclists at least 3 feet of clearance. That's a rule in more than 20 states, but even if it's not a law in your state, make sure you give them plenty of clearance. Adjusting the attitude, so it can be very frustrating to get stuck behind a pack of 20 or 30 bicyclists on Saturday morning when you're trying to get somewhere. But if you allow yourself to get frustrated and you don't reframe it and consider the benefits of bicycling, that frustration can lead to making poor decisions and unsafe acts. So the more frustrated you are, the more likely you are to try to overtake the bicycles in a situation where you shouldn't be. So try to adjust the attitude and remain positive. And then look before you exit your car. So particularly if you pull into a parking spot on the side of the road, particularly if you sit there for a moment, maybe you're fumbling through your purse to find something, or trying to grab something from the back seat, or just taking a little bit of time to get out of the car. A bicyclist could be coming and not realize that you have just parked there. and they tend to be further to the side of the road to avoid being, to give cars more clearance. And if you pop open your door quickly, you could either catch the bicyclist or cause them to swerve into the road where they could be hit. So be particularly cognizant of when you're exiting your car. With that, I'd like to move into our agenda for today, a little bit of an introduction on O3, talk a little bit about the state of the advanced work packaging in our industry, and how we see it, the value of oversight, and how to measure advanced work packaging success, some lessons learned and key takeaways, and then we'll end with some question and answer. So first, just a little introduction on myself, Josh Gervin, the CEO of O3 Solution. I have some expertise in this field. I've been doing software for the last 8 or 10 years or so in this space. I was formerly the SVP of Product and Market Strategy for an industrial construction materials management vendor. I serve as the co-chair for the AWP Benchmarking and Analytics Committee at CII, and I've had leadership positions with Fiatech, both materials management and advanced work packaging. A little bit about our company. We work with owners and EPCs in the space to help implement and measure and monitor the success of advanced work packaging. We've done that on what's the world's largest oil and gas project. It's a $70 billion TIC with 20 contractors and over 700 users of our tool on that job site. We've done it with shutdown turnarounds for chemical companies at a program level. I've done it for oil and gas companies at a program level. Done that with shutdown turnarounds with another chemical organization, and then also working with large lump sum projects as well. Our team members also hold leadership positions with CII and Fiatech, and then also serve as conference strategists with the ATP conference that you heard about a little bit earlier in the call. So how do we see the industry? And from our perspective, how do we see advanced work packaging within the industrial capital asset space? First is that we've seen real success on projects, and we've seen that from as small as $2 million to $70 billion TIC. So the idea that advanced work packaging is only meaningful on large giga greenfield projects is that myth has been dispelled. There's definitely value in doing it on all size projects. As we all know, it was certified as a CII best practice in 2015, but what we see as a challenge is a lack of standard definition of advanced work packaging. If you ask 10 people what they consider advanced work packaging to be, even within the same organization, you often get 10 different answers. And that's a real challenge that's been holding back our industry, is the lack of real standard definition. And that's something that we're very focused on from a CII perspective. So the Performance and Analytics Committee within Advanced Work Packaging is very focused on standard definitions for the degrees of ATP implementation and the how we measure and report success and performance and benchmark against that. One other challenge we see is people using workface planning and advanced work packaging as synonyms. We think that's holding back the industry. Workface planning is very focused on the installation and construction side and keeping crews productive in the field, whereas advanced work packaging it's not a construction methodology. It's a project execution methodology that spans the entire life cycle of a project from concept all the way through commissioning. So it's very important that we dispel that myth that workface planning and advanced work packaging are the same thing. The other challenge or observation that we've seen is that there's a lot of high-touch, one-off implementations of AWP, and that makes sense for where we are in the life cycle of the methodology as it continues to accelerate its penetration of the space and adoption. But that high-touch, one-off implementation process is inherently non-scalable. Where we are today, and what's really exciting and what's going to bring the transformation of the industry, is this owner-driven enterprise scalable approaches. And we're in the early days of that, but a lot of the thought leaders in the space and more ATP mature owners have announced programs where they're adopting it across their entire project portfolio. So, and the same is true for some of the more ATP mature contractors and EPCs as well. So we're in the early days of that, but that's very exciting because that's where we're going to see the real change and maximize the returns of advanced work packaging within our industry. And then the other challenge or observation we've made is a lack of standard definition of success. So similar to the lack of standard definition of what it means to be doing advanced work packaging, is there's a lack of standard definition of how we measure success and how we define success. Obviously, the 10% reduction in TIC is the most common success metric that's thrown around, and CII has kind of really put forward, and that's an important one. But there are a lot of other successes and a lot of other benefits that come out of AWP, and so having a defined set of criteria of what success looks like and how we measure that and how we benchmark that as an industry is really important. And that's another area that we're very focused on from a CII perspective. So one of the things that we see as a great analog for how AWP is transforming the industry is what we saw in safety many years ago. And what we saw there was that safety statistics were relatively flat for a long time, and largely the safety requirements were sort of left up to the contractors. And it was only after the owners started saying, hey, we really want to drive and incent safety, and if we say safety is important to us, then we need to put some standard definition around what that means. We need to put some standard definition around how we measure that. We need to move from lagging indicators to leading indicators, and we need to reward and incent the behavior we want to see. And it's not that contractors didn't want to be safe. It's that contractors are a business, and there are a bunch of requirements coming down from the owners. And if the owners aren't putting safety as one of those requirements that they clearly care about and reward and incent the behavior, then you can't expect that behavior to happen. And so what we saw was the owners made a switch and started saying there's some, in the industry as a whole, but the owners driving that of saying, hey, this is a standard definition of what safety looks like, and then began rewarding people for having more safety, and then also switched from this concept of lagging indicators around fatalities and injuries into these leading indicators of unsafe acts. That switch really helped drive a significant decrease in safety issues. And we're seeing the same thing happen in productivity, right? So the productivity now, we're seeing that owner involvement and owners saying, hey, productivity is important to us, and we're putting some definition around that. Advanced work packaging is important to us. We're putting definition around that. And the biggest thing is actually rewarding the contractors who are putting these steps in place, the contractors who are moving and deploying advanced work packaging. It's very important that the owners include that in their bid evaluation process, and the folks that are taking advanced work packaging seriously and investing in that, they should be rewarded for that, and they should have that should be considered in the bid evaluation. And we're seeing that happen now, which is driving more participation from EPCs and contractors, which is really exciting, and that's how we get this moving forward. So I think, just to kind of talk about some of the ATP challenges that we've seen in this space, one of them is this concept of project snowflakes. So the idea that you can't meaningfully compare across projects because they all are different. They're all these kind of unique snowflakes. They have different stakeholders, they have different organizations, they have different scope, they have different technology stacks. So all of these differences, we'd end up throwing our hands up in the air and saying we can't really meaningfully compare across those. And that really holds us back as an industry. And I think it's one of the reasons why we haven't seen the productivity increases that you've seen in other industries, is because we don't have this continuous feedback loop of improvement that you have in other spaces like manufacturing, where it's a very repeatable process. And so you have a lot of feedback and ability to iterate and improve that continuously, and we've really struggled as an industry to have that because of this project snowflake concept. The other challenge is the lack of incentives. So, contracts don't maximize and share the benefits of AWP between the owners and EPCs and contractors, and so there's, it's important for us to when we approach the productivity gains and the value that putting AWP in place brings, it's important that we share those benefits across the stakeholders so that we're incenting the behavior that we want to see. And so, I think there's leading owners out there are looking at ways of rewarding contractors and having them share in the benefits of the productivity gains, so that there's a real incentive for them to drive AWP and drive productivity within their organizations. And I think that's hugely important for moving the industry forward. Another challenge is the concept that processes can't scale. So this gets to this kind of high touch, one-off approach to AWP. That's too expensive and manual for it to be utilized on small projects. And so it's really a programmatic approach to advanced work packaging, is required to capture where the bulk and the lion's share of projects lie, which is in the $2 to $100 million projects, your shutdown turnarounds and your smaller projects. That's where the vast majority or quantity of projects lie. And so that's where there's a huge opportunity for benefit from AWP. But in order to capture that opportunity in a in a cost-effective way, you need to have a programmatic and scalable approach to advanced work packaging within your organization. Lack of clarity, which gets to this lack of definition of what advanced work packaging means, but you need to have clear definition of roles and responsibilities and expectations. So one of the challenges that you hear from owners will say, well, EPCs and contractors aren't doing what I want, and EPCs and contractors say, well, the owner doesn't really define what they want. They don't do a good job of communicating that. And I think so the most important thing we need to do from an advanced work packaging perspective is clearly define, when we say we want advanced work packaging on this project, whether that's an owner to an EPC or an EPC to its contractors, there needs to be a clear definition. This is what we mean when we say advanced work packaging. And here's what right looks like. This is how we're going to measure success. And then here's how we're going to measure along the way to see whether or not, here's the leading indicators we're going to measure along the way to see if we're setting ourselves up to achieve that success. So very clear definition of what success look like, what the responsibilities are and expectations are, how we're going to measure whether we achieve success at the end with lagging indicators, and how we're going to give feedback throughout the process by measuring leading indicators. Having that all very defined is the first and most important step to successful implementation of AWP. Other challenge we see is selective reporting. This challenge is whether it's EPCs reporting to owners or contractors reporting to EPCs. Our data exchange in this industry is a real challenge, and we need to improve that. We need to have a more efficient exchange of information and more efficient exchange of data, so that we can perform that measurement of leading indicators along the way, and so that we can have a better feedback loop and an improvement loop throughout the life cycle of the project. And then this last challenge of the requirement of experts, whether those are third-party consultants or subject matter experts or internal experts within an organization. There's a high degree of expertise that's required today to maximize benefits of AWP, and there's a limited set of experts in this field. That's a challenge to adoption and to scaling of advanced work packaging within the industry. And so in order to overcome that challenge, one is that we need to train more people and we need to bring more experts, more people up to speed, and the other is we need to institutionalize some of that knowledge so we can standardize it. We build it into our processes and procedures, and we make it a more systematic and standard approach within our organizations. Individually, we need to have that a program within organizations defined and standardized, but then also as an industry, we need to have more definition and more standardization, and so that we can make that exchange of information between organizations more efficient. And again, that's something where CII, we're very focused on that and really trying to drive some standardization, and so that we can make a more efficient communication and exchange of information. So those are some of the challenges we see, and some of the things that, how we're thinking about the industry and how we think what we need to do to drive scalability and adoption. And from our perspective, when we talk about the reporting challenges and the information challenges, we think about the oversight that we provide on projects, whether that's owners having oversight over EPCs or EPCs having oversight over contractors. When we think about the oversight, there's really kind of three different approaches to that. One of those approaches is what we call hands-on, eyes-on, which is, you see what's going on, but you're also highly involved, and that can be very effective, but that's an expensive and time-consuming approach. You have to put resources towards that. Then there's the hands-off, eyes-on, which is you're not doing the doing, but you know that the doing's getting done. You have visibility, you have access to information and data, so you know what's happening. But you're not in there and in the weeds and actually executing. And then the third is kind of eyes closed, hope for the best. And obviously that's a little bit in jest. Nobody signs up saying, hey, I really want to do eyes closed, hope for the best. So maybe a better way of putting that is, it's not that our eyes are closed, it's that the room is dark, right? We don't have visibility, not because we're not looking, but we don't have visibility because the lights aren't turned on, because the information, the data is not being served up in a way that we have access to that in a meaningful way to be able to see the leading indicators and be able to collect that information so we can course correct throughout the life of the project. So obviously the approach that we recommend and the approach that we support our clients with is the hands-off, eyes-on approach, which is if you're an owner or over EPCs or EPC over contractors, you don't want to be involved in doing the doing. That's why you've hired these other parties to do that, but you need to know that doing is getting done and that it's being done correctly. And so what does that look like? From a high level perspective, from concept through commissioning, there's a set of different tools in the execution layer that are producing information and data, and we consume that raw data. So rather than taking information or knowledge, in a form of a hard report, a PDF report, we say, hey, let's just consume the raw data, and then let's perform some analytics on that so that we can answer the questions that around the leading indicators and whether or not we're setting ourselves up for success. So the key there is that it's a raw data consumption and getting away from this really document-driven information exchange, which is incredibly inefficient, and moving towards the way that it's done in all other industries, which is a data-driven information exchange that's far more efficient, and reduces the processing on both sides, and increases the transparency and reduces information asymmetry that leads to inefficiencies. So what does that really look like? We have these different systems, and these are just some example systems that we put in place here. Obviously, everyone knows there's lots of different tools in these areas that live across the life cycle of the project. And initially, we consume data into what we call our AWP master index. And this is the single consolidated source of your package metadata across all of these different tool sets. So if you're doing advanced work packaging correctly, there are a lot of different tool sets and a lot of different packages, and there's a correlation challenge there and a coordination challenge, that something needs to be in place of coordinating the information across those, because you have packages that live in Excel, and you have packages that live in your construction automation tools, and you have packages in your procurement tools and engineering and select. You have tools that have packages across this, and you need a consolidated database of those packages across all of those different tool sets across the life cycle of the project. And then next is the interface component of those. So as the information flows across and through this life cycle of the project, you have a set of interfaces or exchange points, and the output of one package is often the input or constraint to another package. And so this interface management around constraint management is critical to driving the best practices of AWP. Constraint management is one of the primary best practices of advanced work packaging. And that's not just constraint management for IWPs in the field, that's constraint management across the entire life cycle of all the packages throughout the project from concept through commissioning. And then lastly is the oversight and analytics layer that sits on top that provides visual feedback that allows you to manage by exception, that's based off of the analysis that we've done in the background, evaluating performance against the best practices that you've selected for your organization from our library of best practices, and giving real-time predictive leading indicator feedback about whether or not you're setting yourself up for success. And so what does that look like? Well, typically we engage with our clients and understand what their enterprise outcomes are. And those might be construction productivity, like time on tools, or engineering productivity, like hours per piece, engineering hours per piece of equipment, or management team overhead. So if that's owner reps or EPC reps that are required to support the project. Maybe other things like supervisor time in the field. Might be craft exposure hours. You have different metrics that we find that typically all of our clients have kind of 3 to 5 critical KPIs that they measure, and typically start with those and then connect those down into what are the goals from an AWP perspective. How are we setting up our AWP program to support those overall enterprise outcomes? And from those overall AWP objectives or outcomes, we have the goals for a particular project. Here's what we need to accomplish within this project from an AWP perspective. And those goals then allow us to select the best practices to support those goals. And so those AWP best practices are selected from our library of best practices that we manage for our clients, and we offer for our clients to select. And then once you've selected those best practices within the tool, that automatically spins up in the background the metrics to measure whether or not those best practices are happening, as well as outputs the data requirements that you need in order to be able to perform those metrics to know whether or not those best practices are happening. So we start with these high-level enterprise outcomes, these critical KPIs, and then we say, how does AWP support those within your organization? And if that's how AWP is going to support those, then what do we need to accomplish on this project in order to support that? And then in order to accomplish that from an AWP perspective, what best practices are required? We select those from the best practice library inside the tool. And then once we've selected those, that spins up those metrics in the back end to automatically measure whether or not that's happening. And it tells us the data we need to collect. And it's important, and that's kind of a critical piece, is that to drive a data-driven strategy, you have to be very clear in your expectations around the data. So providing data requirements as part of your contractual exhibits early in the process, so that the folks that you're asking to provide data know exactly the data they have to supply and the format and the frequency that's required. Getting very clear around that early is critical to success. And once that data flow is in place, then you can drive metrics, you can measure against best practices, you can tie it to outcomes. But without that data, obviously you don't have visibility, and then you really can't have any kind of oversight. So what does that look like? Well, we take that data in the back end, we're performing measurements against that, and then that's visually reported. We start by performing measurements. In this case, what's showing here is the ratio of actual versus planned duration for installation work packages, but that's getting to, this is more of a lagging indicator around some of your constraint management abilities in the installation work packaging side. But we perform a series of measurements, and they may be a leading indicator measurement around your constraint management process, around whether or not those packages are being released constraint-free with sufficient time before their planned start date, as an example. But we're taking key measurements against this raw data set, and then once we have those measurements, then we can actually compare those against a desired state. And that comparison of actual versus desired gives us the ability to give a score or a rating. And we actually convert that into a 1 to 10 numeric value for a score, and then also give it a red, yellow, green coloring so that it's very easy to manage by exception. And then in addition to the score, the snapshot of your current score, you also get some trend information, both short and long-term trends, so you can understand whether or not you're improving in this area. So for this particular best practice, are we getting better? Are we getting worse? Are we directionally correct? And then we take those scores across an area of responsibility and give you a scorecard. In this particular example, we're looking at an installation scorecard, but those scorecards go across the life cycle of the project, from select or concept all the way through commissioning. So engineering and procurement and construction and turnover and data management and other areas of responsibility within the life cycle of a project have scorecards associated with them. And then once you have those scorecards across your different areas of responsibility, those then roll up to a project level scorecard. So that's a summary and an average of the scores across your different areas of responsibility. And so as you can imagine, different stakeholders have different perspectives, and we have different scorecards mapped to those perspectives. So this would be project managers or project controllers that are kind of looking at the overall project. Engineering manager, construction manager, they would be looking at scorecards specific to their area of responsibility of engineering or construction. A work phase planner might be a little bit further down, and then work phase planner leads, work phase planners, they'd be further down inside of your installation scorecard, focused on more granular information. So we serve up the information at the appropriate level of granularity and detail based off of the stakeholders' role in the organization. From the project level, once you roll up across multiple projects, you get to the program level, so you can see at a program, how am I doing at managing my overall program for advanced work packaging across multiple projects, and then ultimately those tie to the enterprise outcomes. So these are those lagging indicators that we want to tie our leading indicators to. So that's a critical component here, is understanding the desired lagging indicators and then tying the leading indicators to those, and then measuring to see, in fact, that we are driving change inside of those lagging indicators. So at a high level, or kind of summary of that, we have program level scorecards, which are looking at the overall program, looking at advanced work packaging across multiple projects and understanding how are we doing from a program perspective. And here, the target audience for that is your ATP program manager, your ATP project manager. These are folks at the enterprise level that are responsible for the rollout of advanced work packaging across the organization. They can also be people in a construction excellence group or a productivity group, depending on whether or not your organization actually has an AWP, program manager. A lot of the more mature ATP organizations have those and have dedicated resources to those. Certainly something that we recommend for folks that are looking to roll out advanced work packaging. But that's the target for this level granularity and this level of reporting and analytics. And then down to the project level there for specific project, rolling up and understanding the health of advanced work packaging on that overall project. And so that's project managers. There might be an assistant project manager who's the ATP champion for the project controls type people that are looking over multiple aspects of the project. And then below that, you have different areas of responsibility. And within each of those areas of responsibility, you have managers, whether those are construction managers, engineering managers, folks like that, that have a scorecard, and they can understand that the health and adoption of advanced work packaging within their area of responsibility. And then further down below that, you get more and more kind of granular information down into the weeds of individual best practices for folks that are more of a practitioner or lower level in the organization. So what does that ultimately allow us to do? One of the key things that allows us to do is it allows us to get rid of this concept of the project snowflake and that we can't compare across those. You know, what is most exciting to me about advanced work packaging is that it is a framework for planning. It's a project execution methodology that provides a framework for better planning. And it's really, you know, the way we view it is it's the same core concepts of agile project management, but applied to industrial construction. So in the IT world, folks that understand software know that nobody uses waterfall approach to development of software anymore. Everything is done using agile project management. And that change started in the 2000s, and it was 100% market adoption. I mean, 100% of software development is done agile now. And that transformation, you know, occurred in 10 years or less. And that's because it's a significantly more efficient process. And we're seeing that now. We're moving from waterfall to agile inside of construction, and that's really driven, and you know, that's called advanced work packaging. But the core to that, the core component of that agile approach is that it's a better framework for planning, and it's driving more and more continuous iterative planning. And so what's really exciting to us is that advanced work packaging provides a framework for you to measure fundamentally a project's ability to plan. And so if we can abstract away, if we can remove the conversation from the specifics of, well, this was a different contractor, or this was a different EPC, or this was a different contracting strategy, or this was a different scope, or this was a different geographic location, or this was a different project size. If we can get away from those project-specific things that we've used as barriers to cross-project reporting, and instead get to a measurement of a project's fundamental ability to plan, that's something that we can then meaningfully compare across our projects and across organizations and you know, even across industries. And so that's what's most exciting to us about AWP is it's this framework for planning and a framework for measuring a project's fundamental ability to plan. And that's really what we focus on, is measuring leading indicators and performance around the adoption and health of your AWP process. We're really getting at, you know, how healthy is the planning process on this project? And you know, having a healthy planning process doesn't guarantee a successful project, but healthy planning is the best leading indicator for success on a project. So in summary, you know, O3 Solution, we provide AWP program management, or what we call AWP program management. And I think that programmatic approach and approaching it from an enterprise perspective is critical. So defining expectations and setting standards within your organization around advanced work packaging is incredibly important, and that program piece should not be lost. You know, obviously we support projects and have a lot of functionality around projects and engage with projects, but it shouldn't be lost that a programmatic approach is critical to success and moving the industry forward. But there are kind of three major components of the solution. First is the foundation, which is really around setting the conditions for success and defining what right looks like for AWP, and then supporting that with this consolidated AWP master index. So that, you know, we have all of these great tools that have emerged in the various silos across the lifecycle of project from concept through commissioning. And we have all these tools that have been optimized to really perform well inside the operations of those particular phases of a project. And what AWP does is it provides a framework or a methodology for improved and enhanced collaboration and movement across those silos of the life cycle of the project. And where we come in that is we help enable that with this master index, or this single consolidated database of the metadata of these packages across all of the stakeholders and across all of their tool sets, so that you can have better collaboration and coordination and information exchange across there. So we help enable that. But we're in no way a replacement for those core tools that you have in there, your construction automation tools, or your procurement tools, your engineering tools, or your document management tools. We're not a replacement for those tools and have no interest in competing with those tools. We're enabling those tools to work together better in an AWP environment. The second component is the facilitation piece, which is really about enabling best practice adherence. And as we talked about before, constraint management is one of those critical AWP best practices. And we really enable constraint management. Today in the industry, I would say we do constraint checklists. We have this binary concept of, here's a list of constraints. Have I done this? Yes or no? And the other challenge of the fact that we do just constraint checklists and not constraint management, true constraint management, using Excel or other kind of checklist approach to managing constraints. The other challenge that we have there is that constraints are owned by many different organizations. The owner actually is responsible for many of the constraints, something that people don't realize until we show them some graphs around the ownership of constraints. So it's owners, EPCs, contractors, all have a different role in constraint management. So there's a real need for collaboration across different organizations. And then within a specific organization, you have lots of different stakeholders in different functional areas that are responsible for constraints. So constraints is really, true constraint management is a collaboration challenge. And we help facilitate that by moving out of Excel or other kind of constraint checklist approaches to providing true constraint management that connects across all those stakeholders. And then lastly is the oversight component. And this is what allows driving of continuous improvement. And that's around monitoring the adherence to best practices, collecting the data, performing these measurements and metrics against the selected best practices, and then reporting that in a visual manner that allows management by exception. So I can focus on the areas, show me all the reds, let me see, okay, this is the area of the project where I'm struggling, let me drill down into that. Okay, now show me all the reds within this area of the project. Okay, here are the best practices where I'm struggling, let me drill into that and understand where my challenges are. Let me slice and dice that data, maybe by discipline or by area or by contractor. Let me look at different information so I can understand where the challenges lie, and then from there I now have the information to be able to drive have the feedback loop and the information to actually course correct and improve before the end of the project, where I get my lagging indicators that say, hey, we missed the mark. So let's be able to capture that information. Let's get that data flowing in on a regular basis so that we have this feedback and opportunity to course correct and to influence the lagging indicators, during the course of the project, rather than just finding out, that we did a poor job at the end of the project. So some lessons learned that we've captured throughout the process of implementing with various clients. One is running a parallel strategy for quick results. So as we all know, we work with massive organizations, or we are, in case the audience, a lot of folks here belong to massive organizations, and to fully implement and maximize the return of advanced work packaging, it requires change within the organization. And we are large organizations that require time to change and require a plan. And so a parallel approach of laying out from a program perspective, this is what AWP means to us. Here's the journey of where we want to be in 4 or 5 years. Here's where we are today. Here's how we're gonna change and get to full AWP maturity over this time period. Laying that out and having an understanding of those expectations and what right looks like throughout that journey is very important. But also important is to engage quickly with projects and show some value and show some quick wins, because that's how you gain the support of the executives and the other folks that you need to help you from a top-down perspective in this change management challenge. Just like any other process shift or significant change in process, the greatest challenge or the greatest impediment to adoption is change management. And so having a very deliberate approach to change management is important. And in fact, we found that that was such an important part of the process that we've built tools into the application to measure your education and engagement. We found that education and awareness and engagement were great leading indicators of success of your AWP implementation. So if people aren't aware of what is expected of them, if people aren't aware of what their role is in AWP, if people aren't educated on how their role of AWP impacts the overall success of the project, if they're not educated on how to execute, if they're not trained on what they need to do, it's unlikely that they will be successful, and therefore unlikely that the overall AWP implementation will be successful. So this change management, awareness and education is so important that we actually built, reporting into our tool around that. We measure the level of engagement, we measure the level of awareness, we map that against your plan of what you expected or what you laid out as being required in terms of levels of engagement and awareness. And we track your performance against that, because again, education and awareness and engagement of the people side is a very important leading indicator for success of the adoption of advanced work packaging as a methodology. So don't underestimate the need for awareness and education programs like any change management challenge. Then setting expectations and holding stakeholders accountable, whether that's different functional areas, contractors, vendors, project management teams, executives. Having very clear expectations. This is what AWP means to our organization. These are the outcomes that we expect to get out of advanced work packaging. These are the best practices that we're going to follow. When we say we do AWP, that's not a yes, no question. We say, this is what we mean when we do AWP. It's this set of best practices that we expect by different project phase. So when we're in select phase or concept phase, this is what we expect from AWP. When we're in engineering, this is what we expect from AWP. When we're in turnover, this is what we expect from AWP. Having that clearly defined so that all the stakeholders know what right looks like and how they're going to be measured against that is the first and most important step to successful implementation of AWP. If you don't have a plan that's defined at that level, you will not be able to maximize the benefits of AWP. You may be able to capture some success from some subset of AWP, but if you want to fully maximize the benefits of AWP, you have to have that level of planning and that level of expectation setting within your own organization, and then for the other partner organizations that are part of the project delivery team. Then the expectations is critical, but then also obviously the measurements. So getting the data, establishing the data requirements so that you have very clear expectations about the data that you need. Doing that during part of the bid package. So as we all know, asking for data and changing the data requirements after cutting the contracts is more challenging than doing it beforehand. So having contractual data exhibits, whether it's owner to EPC or EPC to contractor, having those established as part of the bid package so there's a clear expectation, and then those organizations can then incorporate that into their estimation process and their planning process. That's just far more efficient than waiting until after those contracts are cut. So having those data requirements established early in the process, having that flow of data, and then having the ability then therefore to have visibility and oversight over your partner organizations who are part of that project delivery. So that gets to the measurement and monitoring of success, and the key there is leading indicators. Have to get away from this lagging indicator measurement and get to the leading indicators, focusing on measuring the project's ability to plan. That's the core leading indicators. Is planning happening? Is healthy planning happening is it happening frequently enough? Is it happening to the degree and depth that's required? So, when we look at measuring best practices, we're not just measuring, hey, are they doing AWP? We're looking at a very granular level of understanding. Are we just creating packages the day before so that we can check a box and say we're using work packaging? Are we creating those packages sufficiently early enough in the process to actually allow for planning? Is that planning actually occurring? So are we using AWP as a framework to improve our planning and therefore improve the job? Or is it a check the box kind of thing because we got this requirement that said, hey, we need some AWP on this project. And so that's what we say when we say measure and monitor leading indicators. You got to look at, at a detailed level of, is planning really happening here? Are we really gaining the benefits of advanced work packaging? Are we setting ourselves up for success to gain those benefits? So some of the key takeaways: AWP is a project execution methodology. AWP is not a construction execution methodology. Construction is one phase of the project, one component of the project, but advanced work packaging is a project execution methodology that spans the entire life cycle of the project from concept through commissioning. So if you're focused in on only construction, you're probably doing work phase planning. You're probably not doing AWP, and there's a lot more you could be doing and a lot of benefit that you could be gathering, and we strongly recommend that you look at those areas and how you can gain similar benefits to what you're doing in work phase planning, but apply to the rest of the project. Owners need to drive AWP. This is getting back to this way that we saw the change that happened around safety, the owners, one, defining some standards of how we want to measure that, incenting contractors to invest in that area and invest in measurement and invest in leading indicators and invest in safety programs, because owners said, we're going to reward you for that. Today, you as an owner, you wouldn't ever even contemplate awarding a contract to a contractor who didn't have a safety program in place. That would be immediate disqualification. You wouldn't even review the bid. Yet, today we don't have something similar in place around AWP or around productivity, and there's a real opportunity for us to put that in place, for us to have clear expectations of here's what we want around productivity and AWP, but then more importantly than even setting the expectations is rewarding that behavior, and we need to get out of the mode. We can't say as owners, hey, we love AWP and it's important to us, and then we get bids from contractors, and one of those is an AWP mature contractor who has a real plan around AWP, but maybe they come in slightly higher up front because they're making upfront investments to capture downstream benefit, and then we award it to the contractor who had a lower price on the upfront component. If we can't talk out of one side of our mouth and say we want AWP and that's important to us, and then not include that in our evaluation process. So I think it's important that owners need to drive it from an expectation perspective, but they need to drive it from a rewarding contractors who are AWP mature and are making investments into AWP. If we want to move AWP forward as an industry, we have to reward those people who are doing that, who are investing in it. So then defining what AWP means to your organization, that's critical. Setting the expectations. What does right look like? What are the best practices that we follow within our organization? How do we measure those? What's the data we need to measure those? So including those data requirements in the contracts, we need data exhibits upfront early in the bid packages so that the folks who are responsible for providing that data can include that in their estimates. They can include that in their planning process, or give them plenty of time to include that as a requirement. Let them know that's part of the scope early so that they can put that through their process. Putting incentives in place, so sharing not only incentives around, hey, you're more likely to win this bid if you're more AWP mature, so that's an incentive to invest in AWP, but then also incentives in place around sharing the benefits of AWP, whether that's owner to EPC or EPC to contractor. Let's incent people to invest in the programs in general within their organizations, but then let's also incent on a project basis by rewarding and sharing some of those benefits. Measuring and holding your teams and partners accountable. So first is setting expectations, and then second is measuring. If we don't measure, then we can't hope to manage and improve. Measurement is critical, and we need to put more standardization around measurement, and we're driving this at CII. We're driving this to establish some industry standards around this, and I think that's going to be critical for wide scale adoption of AWP throughout all of our industry. Starting with a parallel plan that focuses on quick wins. So again, we're large organizations, and so going through and getting from limited or no AWP maturity to full AWP maturity as a journey is something that takes investment and takes time. And so putting that larger plan in place and having multiple phases or horizons associated with that plan is critical. But then also having quick wins and showing value so that you can gain support within the organization and have top-down support for your change management is also critical. And then change management, with any project execution change, any process change management is critical, and that same thing is true for AWP success. It is a project execution methodology. It is a change to the way that you're doing projects today, and so that change requires change management, and you shouldn't underestimate that. And in fact, we suggest that you have a means of measuring and overseeing that change management process, and that's why we've actually added that as one of the best practices and leading indicators that we measure as part of our solution. So with that, I'd like to turn it over and understand if we have any questions and see if we can address those. So thank you very much for your time.
Great, thank you, Josh. Now is the time for anyone with questions or comments to please send them to the panelists, Josh or myself, through the chat window or through the Q&A tool that you should see in your control panel on screen. So just give it a minute or two and see if anyone. You could also use the hand raise function, but. Okay, Lane, I will pass the mic over to you. And you're on mute, Lane, but as soon as you can unmute, you can go ahead and ask Josh a question. Okay. I think we can hear you now, Lane.
Okay. Hey, from an owner's perspective, what are some of the biggest questions or needs that they're asking, want to see as far as a requirement for contractors for EPCs?
Sorry, could you just repeat that once more? It was just a little quiet, Lane.
From an owner's perspective, are you getting any questions or wants from owners to see more about EPCs from AWP?
Did that
breaking up there a little bit, but I think the question was from an owner's perspective, are we seeing more, was it ADP maturity from the EPCs? Was that the question?
Yeah, close to it. Is there anything specific that they are wanting to see from EPCs as owners are getting more educated on AWP practices? Is there anything that stands out that they're wanting to see more from EPCs?
Yeah, so I think, I think part of the challenge. First, the answer to that is yes. We're seeing some more standardization in that and what owners are asking for, and we're driving that from two perspectives. One, from our perspective as a company, and then also from our participation within CII. So we're working now to define, and that's our goal for our committee this year, is to define a standard set of kind of best practices and metrics and KPIs by for that's kind of a CII blessed approach of good housekeeping seal of approval for metrics and measurement of AWP. And I think once we have that in place, that standard will be a great place to educate kind of the masses and have a standard to start from when we go. That then on a more kind of specific level, we've seen different levels of maturity with the different organizations that we work with. But I would say that the biggest thing we're seeing is a growth of the metrics that people want to see outside of the installation side. So there's been a decent amount of information exchange and reporting around installation to date. That's an area from a data that owners are getting, often today are getting information about installed quantities and things like that. What we're seeing is a desire to have more visibility in other phases of the project. So more visibility over, engineering and construction management processes that are earlier than that installation process. And the key piece to that, the one that I think the owners are understanding and seeing now, is understanding how those earlier phases of the project tie to the downstream phases. And so what I mean by that is understanding how the upfront, vendor documents and review of vendor documents and vendor information, the upfront detailed design and engineering processes, how those are aligned to best support the path of construction, and then also, sometimes even more importantly from an owner's perspective, the path of commissioning. So having having visibility into the fact that, as an owner, there's a much more interest now and understanding in the value of visibility into, it's not how productive, are the functions being. I don't care about how many drawings per day are being cranked out. What I care about is, are the right drawings being done? Do those drawings match my path of construction? And does that path of construction ultimately map to my path of commissioning, my startup process? So I think owners are being more aware of understanding how productivity in itself in a particular functional area isn't the key. It's also understanding that we're doing the right stuff, and that right stuff is defined. The priority is defined by that path of construction and path of commissioning. So I don't know if that addresses your question. I hope so.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Josh. And we have time for one more question. This one's kind of a two-part question. Part one, is AWP being implemented mostly in oil and gas, or is it being implemented in other industries or other industry sectors as well, such as infrastructure, power, etc.? And also, would you say you're seeing implementation happening more in the US than overseas, or vice versa? And that's from Sinika.
Yeah, so that's great question. So we target 6 industries within industrial construction. Those are power, oil and gas, chemical, mining and metals, infrastructure, and heavy manufacturing. Within that, we've seen, I think from our perspective, the most penetration within oil and gas and chemicals. So both of those have significant participation and major leader organizations that have adopted AWP in a very meaningful way, in a kind of enterprise program level way. So I would say it's definitely not just oil and gas. I think chemical is in par in terms of their focus on AWP and commitment to it. We also see commitment from power and mining and metals as well. Not quite to the extent that we see in those others, but we see commitment in those organizations. And then earlier in infrastructure and heavy manufacturing, but we see it there as well. But in order of kind of maturity or commitment levels, I'd put oil and gas and chemical at the top, and then power and mining metals next, and then infrastructure and heavy manufacturing third.
Okay. So that brings us to 10:58 or 9:58 in my time zone. So we've only got about 2 minutes left. So I think now's a good time to wrap up. I just want to thank everybody for registering for the webinar, and a reminder that we will send out a link to the recording. Thanks to our presenter, Josh from O3 Solution. We encourage you to check out O3 Solutions website and check out the Advanced Work Packaging Conference website, awpconference.com. Like I said at the start, we're going to be updating that on an ongoing basis as calendar information becomes available, and right away you should be able to find some good high-level information about what to expect at the conference, some sponsorship information, and sponsorship and advisory group announcements. As I also mentioned, we're working with our advisory group again this year to develop the program. Every year we aim to provide usable, practical information about advanced work packaging implementation. And this year will be no different. It is an owner-driven event, and we're happy to announce that we do have participation currently from ExxonMobil, Dow Chemical, LyondellBasell, and Valero, and we've got a bunch more announcements to come in that regard. from the advisory group standpoint. So again, you'll also find O3 Solution on the main stage and in the breakout program at this year's conference. So we encourage you to sign up and join us at the JW Marriott Houston Galleria in Houston, Texas, October 2nd and 3rd, 2018. Thank you again, and that's it for today. We'll see you next time. The next webinar is scheduled for March 28th, and that will be on Advanced Work Packaging Key Performance Indicators featuring Group ASI. That's it for today. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.